The letter arrived on a morning that felt wrong before I even touched it, the sky hanging low and colorless as if the world had been drained overnight, and the silence in my apartment thick enough to hear my own breathing. It lay on the floor just inside the door, untouched by wind, addressed in handwriting I recognized instantly yet could not place in memory, my name written with precise, deliberate strokes that made my stomach tighten, and beneath it an address I had not seen in 20 years. The town of Black Hollow, along with no return name, no explanation, only a sentence written inside after I tore it open with fingers that had begun to tremble without permission. The house is awake again. It remembers you. Come before it finishes remembering everything. I stood there for a long time, rereading the words until they lost meaning and became shapes, my mind insisting this was some elaborate mistake, a prank, or a hallucination born from exhaustion, yet something deeper, older, stirred beneath my ribs, a sensation like a locked door slowly being pushed open from the other side, releasing a breath of air that smelled faintly of dust, old wood, and rain-soaked soil. Black Hollow was a place I had buried deliberately, a town where memories did not fade. So much as rot, where the past pressed its face against the present and whispered through the cracks, and the house was something I had sworn never to think about again. Yet the letter had said its name without saying it, had reached into a place I had sealed off for survival, and by the time I realized I was packing a bag, my hands already knew what to do, moving with a grim familiarity that terrified me more than fear itself, as though some part of me had been waiting for this summons all along. The drive took 6 hours, each mile peeling away layers of the life I had built until the road narrowed and the trees thickened, their branches leaning inward like eavesdroppers. A dull ache I remembered too well, the same sensation that had haunted my childhood nights when the house would groan and settle as if adjusting its bones, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white, heart pounding not with surprise but with recognition, like returning to a crime scene where you were both witness and accomplice. Black Hollow looked unchanged, which was somehow worse, the same crooked lampposts, the same shuttered storefronts, the same clock tower frozen at 3:17, its hands rusted in place since the night of the fire. People moved slowly, deliberately, their gazes sliding away when they noticed my car, and I realized with a jolt that they recognized me. Or rather the version of me that had never left, the child who vanished after the incident everyone pretended not to remember, and as I parked near the old square, an elderly woman selling wilted flowers met my eyes and whispered, "You shouldn't have come back," before turning away as if she had said nothing at all. I didn't respond because there was nothing to say. The truth was, I shouldn't have come back. But the letter had made it clear this was not a choice so much as a correction, and the house had always been good at correcting things, reshaping reality until it fit its needs. The road to the house lay at the edge of town, half swallowed by forest, and as I drove it, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath fogging the windshield though the season was wrong, the trees closing in until sunlight fractured into thin, pale shards, and when the house finally emerged, my chest tightened so sharply I had to pull over, the structure looming exactly as it had in my nightmares. 3 stories of dark timber and stone, windows like unblinking eyes, the roof sloping at angles that defied comfort, and the front door standing slightly ajar, as though it had been waiting and grown impatient. I remembered running down these steps once, barefoot and bleeding. The sound of something moving inside the walls chasing me into the night, and now, standing before it again, I felt the same certainty settle over me, that the house was not abandoned, not empty, not dormant, it was alert. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into another body, the air inside thick and cool, smelling of dust and something metallic beneath it, and the door closed behind me with a final, echoing thud that reverberated through the floorboards and up my spine, the sound carrying a weight that said you are not leaving until I decide, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw that the interior was impossibly preserved, furniture draped in white sheets like patient ghosts, the grandfather clock in the hall ticking despite its hands not moving. Each click too loud, too intentional, and I became acutely aware of the silence between sounds, a silence that listened back. I moved slowly, each step cautious, memories surfacing unbidden, the staircase where my sister had stood the last night I saw her, the mirror that never reflected us quite right, the hallway that always seemed longer on the way back than on the way out, and with every remembered detail, the house seemed to respond, a subtle creak here, a sigh there, as if pleased to be recognized, and when I reached the living room, I froze. Because on the mantel sat 3 objects that had not been there when I left: my childhood journal, its cracked leather cover unmistakable, a rusted key tied with red thread, and a photograph turned face down, its edges curled with age. My hands shook as I picked up the journal, the weight of it heavier than paper should be, and flipping it open, I found entries written in my handwriting but not in my memory, pages filled with observations about the house that read less like a child's diary and more like field notes. And dates that overlapped with the weeks leading up to my sister's disappearance, the last entry ending abruptly mid-sentence: "She says the house speaks to her now. She says it promised." The rest of the page was torn out, and as I stared at the jagged edge, a sound rose from above, slow footsteps pacing the 3rd floor, deliberate and unhurried, and my heart hammered as the truth pressed in around me. I was not alone, and I never had been. I forced myself to breathe, to think, to remember the rules we had learned too late, that the house fed on attention, that fear sharpened it, that silence sometimes starved it, and yet, as I stood there, the footsteps stopped directly above me, followed by the unmistakable sound of something being dragged across the floor, and a voice drifted down, soft and familiar enough to make my vision blur, a voice I had mourned for 2 decades, saying my name the way only she ever had, stretched and questioning, and every instinct screamed to run, but my feet remained rooted, because the house had always known the shape of my weakness, and it was speaking through it now. I don't know how long I stood there listening to that voice, my mind splitting between terror and longing, logic and grief, but eventually the sound faded, replaced by a whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves, a chorus of barely audible murmurs overlapping and intertwining. And in that sound, I understood the message the letter had tried to convey: the house was remembering, reconstructing the past piece by piece, and I had returned not to uncover the truth, but to complete it. When I finally turned toward the staircase, the photograph on the mantel flipped over on its own, landing face up with a soft slap, and there we were, younger, smiling, standing in front of the house, with one detail wrong enough to make my blood run cold. In the reflection of the front window behind us, there was a 3rd figure standing in the doorway, watching, its features blurred, its presence undeniable, and written in ink at the bottom of the photo, in my sister's handwriting, were the words: "It won't let us both leave." I don't remember deciding to climb the stairs, only the sensation of movement beginning somewhere behind my eyes and traveling down into my legs, as though the house itself had issued a command my body obeyed without consulting me, each step creaking beneath my weight in a tone that felt almost conversational, the wood responding differently depending on where I placed my foot, warmer near the center, colder near the edges, and as I ascended, the air grew denser, pressing against my ears until the world outside the house, outside memory, felt impossibly far away. And I became aware of a low, continuous hum vibrating through the walls, not loud enough to be sound so much as pressure, the kind that seeps into your bones and settles there, and with every step, fragments of childhood returned uninvited, my sister daring me to race her to the top, our laughter echoing too long, our mother calling us back down in a voice tight with an anxiety she never explained, and always the sense that the stairs were listening, counting. The 3rd floor hallway stretched ahead of me in a way that defied geometry, longer than the house should allow, doors lining both sides, some familiar, some distinctly wrong, too tall, too narrow, their frames subtly warped as if grown rather than built, and the footsteps I had heard were gone now, replaced by an absence so complete it rang louder than noise. And when I reached the door at the far end, the one that had never been a room, not really, just a space the house pretended didn't exist, I found it ajar, the darkness beyond thicker than shadow, swallowing the light from the hallway without reflection. That I stood there, hand hovering inches from the doorframe, and for the first time since returning, I felt the weight of choice press against me, heavy and suffocating. Because I understood then what the house wanted, not simply my presence, but my participation, my consent, and the realization made my stomach twist as I remembered the journal, the notes written by a child who had been trying to understand a predator disguised as shelter, and with a sudden clarity that bordered on nausea, I saw myself as I must have been then, observant, afraid, and complicit in ways I hadn't been old enough to name. The darkness inside the room pulsed faintly, like a slow breath, and when I finally stepped across the threshold, the door closed behind me without a sound, sealing me into a space that smelled faintly of damp earth and iron, the walls absorbing light until the room existed in shades of suggestion rather than form. And then, gradually, details emerged: a narrow bed pressed against one wall, its sheets rumpled as if recently used, chalk markings etched into the floor in overlapping symbols that hurt my eyes to focus on, and in the center, a standing mirror taller than any I remembered, its surface cloudy, reflecting not the room but something deeper, layered, like looking through water into another place. The mirror had always been wrong. Even when we were children, reflections lagged, expressions didn't match, and sometimes, if you stood very still, the image would tilt its head when you didn't. But now, staring into it as an adult, the wrongness sharpened into something unmistakably intentional. And as I watched, my reflection stepped closer while I remained still, its face creasing into an expression of familiarity that made my skin crawl, and when it spoke, it used my voice but not my words, saying, "You were always better at listening than she was," and I staggered back, colliding with the bed, my heart slamming against my ribs as memories surged forward with brutal force, nights spent whispering to the walls. The subtle rewards the house offered in response: warmth when we were cold, quiet when we were afraid, the way doors would open just a little faster if you asked nicely, and beneath it all, the unspoken rule we had learned through instinct rather than instruction: the house gave back what you gave it, multiplied. The mirror reflection smiled sadly, as if at a private joke, and continued, "She wanted more." She always did, and at that, the room shifted, the walls stretching outward, rearranging themselves with a slow, nauseating fluidity until the darkness peeled back to reveal another space layered atop the first, a memory room, I realized, one the house had reconstructed from fragments it had collected, and suddenly I was standing in our old bedroom. Exactly as it had been the last summer before everything fell apart, sunlight slanting through the window, dust motes suspended midair, my sister sitting on the floor surrounded by open books and scribbled notes, her face alight with a fierce, dangerous excitement I recognized instantly, and though I knew this was not truly her, my chest ached with the familiarity of it, the way she looked up and grinned, saying, "It's alive, you know. It's not like other houses. It listens. It remembers. And it's lonely." I wanted to scream at the memory, to warn her, to grab her shoulders and shake her until the knowledge transferred, but the scene played on without acknowledging me, my younger self sitting opposite her, nodding uncertainly, already half convinced, and I watched with horror as the house filled in details I had forgotten, or suppressed, the long conversations we had about staying forever, about how the world outside was loud and cruel and temporary, while this place was constant, eternal, capable of holding on to you if you asked the right way. And as the memory shifted again, night falling abruptly, I saw the chalk symbols forming on the floor for the first time, my sister's hand stained white, her eyes bright with sleeplessness as she whispered promises into the walls, and something in the shadows leaned closer to listen. The scene fractured then, breaking into overlapping moments, my sister arguing with our parents, her voice shaking with desperation as she begged them not to sell the house, me standing silently in the hallway, torn between fear and loyalty, the night of the fire, alarms screaming, smoke choking the air, my sister pulling me toward the third floor while flames licked the walls below, her grip iron tight as she hissed, "It's now or never," and in the mirror room, I cried out, the sound tearing from my throat as the truth finally assembled itself into a shape I could no longer deny: she hadn't been taken by the house. She had offered herself to it, believing she could control the bargain, believing that love and attention would be enough to tame something that had been feeding far longer than we had been alive. The memory dissolved, leaving me alone again with the mirror, my reflection once more mimicking my movements precisely now, its expression empty, and the voice, no longer pretending to be mine, spoke from everywhere at once, filling the room with a resonance that vibrated my teeth, saying, "She stays because she chose to. You left because you were allowed to." Balance must be restored, and the floor trembled beneath my feet as the house reacted, walls groaning, beams flexing, the hum deepening into something almost like satisfaction. And in that moment, I understood the nature of the letter's warning. The house did not simply remember, it corrected, reshaping the present to align with an unresolved past, and my return had triggered the final phase of a pattern set in motion decades ago. That I backed toward the door, panic clawing its way up my throat, but the hallway beyond was no longer the same. The doors rearranged, the lengths distorted, and as I ran, the house shifted around me, corridors narrowing, ceilings lowering, the air growing hotter, thicker, each breath a struggle, whispers brushing my ears, "Stay, listen, you owe us," and when I finally burst into what should have been the stairwell, I found myself instead in the dining room, the table set for three, plates dusty but neatly arranged, chairs pulled out as if expecting company, and at the head of the table sat my sister, or something wearing her shape, her features too still, her eyes reflecting the room in impossible depth, and as she looked up at me, I saw not malice but exhaustion, centuries of it pressed into a face that had been 22 when she disappeared. "You came back," she said, her voice layered, echoing faintly, and I fell to my knees, the weight of grief and guilt crushing me at last, words spilling out in a rush as I begged forgiveness for leaving, for surviving, for not understanding, and she listened, head tilted, hands folded neatly on the table, and when I finished, she sighed, a sound like wind moving through old beams, and said softly, "I didn't want to trap you. I wanted to save you. But the house doesn't understand saving. It only understands keeping," and the walls shuddered at her words, a warning tremor, and she met my eyes with sudden urgency, adding, "It won't let us both exist outside its rules. One of us has to stay. One of us always had to." The implication hung between us, heavy and inevitable, and as the house leaned in, listening, I realized with cold clarity that part one had been the invitation, part two the revelation, and what remained, what the house was waiting for, was my decision, because it had never been about taking, it had always been about choosing who belonged. The house fell into a silence so complete that it felt ceremonial, as though every beam, nail, and hidden corridor had drawn in a single, collective breath to witness what came next, and in that quiet I became painfully aware of my own heartbeat, each thud echoing through the dining room like a countdown, my sister, or the version of her shaped and sustained by the house, watching me with an expression that balanced on the knife edge between hope and resignation, her fingers tightening imperceptibly on the edge of the table as if she, too, understood that whatever I chose would not only define our fates but rewrite the house's memory of itself. I rose slowly, my legs unsteady, the weight of years pressing down on me. And as I looked around the room, details sharpened with cruel clarity, the faint scorch marks along the ceiling where the fire had tried and failed to claim this place, the wallpaper patterned with shapes that now looked unmistakably like eyes, the clock on the wall ticking again though it had been broken since before my birth, and with each observation, the house seemed to lean closer, walls creaking softly in anticipation, the hum beneath the floorboards deepening into a vibration that settled into my bones, urging, insisting. "I didn't know," I said finally, the words inadequate even as they left my mouth, because knowledge, I had learned, was rarely the same as innocence, and my sister's lips curved into a sad smile as she nodded. Rising from her chair with a grace that felt practiced, rehearsed over countless repetitions of this moment that had ended differently each time in her imagination but always with the same result. "You weren't supposed to," she replied, stepping closer, and as she did, the air around her shimmered faintly, her outline blurring at the edges as if she were not entirely anchored to this version of reality. And I realized then the cost of her choice, not just her freedom, but her coherence, her gradual unraveling into something the house could sustain but not fully preserve. She gestured around us, at the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath our feet, and said, "It keeps me by remembering me. But memories change when they're all you are." The house responded to her words with a low groan, a sound like distant thunder trapped underground, and the lights flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally across the room, and I felt a sudden, visceral understanding settle into place. The house was not simply a place or even a being in the way we understood such things, it was a mechanism of memory. A vast, hungry archive that required living anchors to stabilize its endless accumulation of pasts, and my sister had been one such anchor, chosen not by force but by belief, by her conviction that she could master what had already mastered generations before her. The bargain, I realized, had always been incomplete, unstable, because she had offered herself out of love, not submission, and the house did not know what to do with that kind of gift. "It's been weakening," she continued, her voice dropping, urgency threading through it, and I saw now the fine cracks running along the walls, the subtle warping of the floor, signs of strain I had missed before. "That's why it called you back. It needs another anchor. A stronger one. Someone who understands it better than I did. Her eyes met mine, searching, and in them I saw not a plea for rescue but a request for release, and the realization struck me with devastating force. The true choice was not between staying or leaving, but between perpetuating the cycle or ending it, and both paths demanded a sacrifice the house would accept. The whispers rose again, filling the room, overlapping fragments of voices pulled from different times, different lives. Children laughing, adults arguing, promises murmured in the dark. And I felt them brush against my thoughts, offering justifications, reframing the narrative, painting the act of staying as noble, necessary, inevitable, and I understood how my sister had been seduced by this place, how easily meaning could be manufactured when fear was dressed up as purpose. I closed my eyes, drawing in a slow breath, and in that moment of stillness, another memory surfaced, one untainted by the house's influence, my sister and I lying on the grass far from Black Hollow, staring up at the stars, her voice soft as she said she wanted to see the world, to leave something behind that mattered, and I realized then that staying here, either of us, was the opposite of that dream. It was erasure disguised as eternity. When I opened my eyes, the house sensed the shift, the air tightening, the walls creaking louder, and my sister's expression changed, a flicker of understanding crossing her face as I said quietly, "It doesn't get to choose anymore." The words felt small against the enormity of what I intended, but they were enough to provoke a reaction, the house shuddering violently, lights bursting, furniture sliding across the floor as the structure resisted, the hum escalating into a roar that drowned out the whispers, and I knew time was short. I grabbed my sister's hand, warm, solid in a way she hadn't been before, and pulled her toward the center of the room. Where the chalk symbols from the memory room began to surface through the floorboards, glowing faintly as if responding to our proximity, and fragments of the journal's words surfaced in my mind, patterns and warnings assembling into a final, dangerous clarity. The symbols weren't to bind it, I shouted over the noise, my voice barely audible above the chaos, they were to focus it, to give it something specific to remember, and as I spoke, the house reacted with fury, walls cracking, ceiling plaster raining down as if in protest. And I felt a sharp, searing pain bloom behind my eyes as the house turned its attention fully on me, memories not my own flooding my mind in a violent torrent, faces, names, moments of fear and longing spanning decades, centuries, until I screamed, dropping to my knees, my grip on my sister's hand the only thing anchoring me to the present. Through the pain, I forced myself to concentrate, to shape the memory I was offering, not of myself, not of her, but of the house as it truly was, empty, unloved, unobserved, stripped of meaning and attention, and as that image solidified, I felt the symbols flare brightly, the air cracking with energy as the mechanism I had unwittingly helped design as a child snapped into place. The house convulsed, a sound like a wounded animal tearing through the structure as the walls began to dissolve, rooms collapsing into each other, memories unraveling, and my sister cried out, not in pain but in relief, her form growing more solid, more real, even as the house around us began to forget itself. The whispers turned into screams, then into static, then into nothing at all, and with a final, shuddering collapse, the weight of the place lifted, the pressure in my skull easing as the hum died away, leaving behind a silence that felt earned rather than imposed. We found ourselves lying on the ground beneath open sky, the stars bright and sharp above us, the house gone entirely. Replaced by a scar of blackened earth and scattered debris that looked mundane, harmless, incapable of remembering anything at all, we lay there for a long time, neither of us speaking, until my sister finally sat up, drawing a shaky breath, her laughter bubbling up unexpectedly, fragile and real, and I laughed too, the sound breaking free of my chest like something long imprisoned. The town of Black Hollow would wake the next morning to an empty lot where the house had stood, its history already blurring, records incomplete, stories contradictory, and over time, the absence would become just another unremarkable fact, a gap no one could quite explain or feel compelled to fill. We left before dawn, driving away together as the first light crept over the horizon, the road widening, the trees thinning, the ache behind my eyes fading with every mile, and though I knew the memories would never fully leave us, that some echoes would linger in dreams and quiet moments, I also knew this, the house had lost its anchor, its witness, its story, and without those, it was nothing more than forgotten ground. Incapable of calling anyone back again, years later, would sometimes wake in the night, heart racing, certain I had heard a familiar creak or whisper, but it never came, and in the silence that followed, I understood the final truth we had stolen from the house, that memory, like fear, only has power when it is fed, and some places, no matter how loudly they call, deserve to be left unanswered forever.